Is the accounting profession making progress closing the diversity gap? This is the IssuesWatch podcast. Hello, and welcome to the IssuesWatch podcast. I'm Don Meyer, Chief Marketing Officer at the New Jersey Society of CPAs. Diversity in the CPA profession has changed very little in the last 25 years. That was the opening line to a diversity article I wrote 10 years ago. Unfortunately, the line still applies in 2022. For decades, the accounting profession has pursued diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DE&I, initiatives to create opportunities for all to feel welcome, valued, and critical to serving the public interest. Yet progress is inconsistent at best. There are more than 500,000 licensed CPAs in the United States, but only 2% of them are Black. Even though accounting has been consistently ranked as one of the leading majors for students, minority students are not considering it a viable option, tending to opt for other majors or professions where they see more diversity. Additionally, the profession has difficulty holding on to qualified candidates. At each step in the supply chain, the percentage of minority representation drops, from college enrollment to overall CPA firm employees. Here with me to discuss the diversity gap in the profession is Darryl Jackson, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Institute of Management Accountants. Darryl, welcome.
Thank you, Don. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'd certainly bring you greetings from the Institute of Management Accountants, our staff and volunteers. We love the platform that you've developed here and look forward to participating.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. And of course, you guys are very close by. You're practically down the road from us. So
yes, absolutely.
This is long overdue doing this.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And I know you're no stranger to state CPA societies, having worked for the New York State Society of CPAs. So tell us a little bit about IMA's joint research project with the California Society of CPAs.
Yes, indeed. We launched this research in February 2021, and it's entitled Diversifying U.S. Accounting Talent, a Critical Imperative to Achieve Transformational Outcomes. And I think if I had to give a high-level description of what this research did is, I think it provided some great quantitative metrics as well as some great qualitative metrics, and I'll explain a bit. I think the metrics, when it comes to diversity, they are what they are, and what we found just by pure numbers is that, still, 100 years after the first Black CPA, there's still a deficit in underrepresented talent. So even though the talent has grown within the profession, it's still extremely minimal at the leadership positions. And I'll give you some examples. So in 1983, African Americans compose of 5.5% of the accounting profession population. Now we're at 8.5%, but still at 1.6% of leadership positions. And when I say leadership positions, I mean CFOs, partner level positions, and that those numbers are reflected across all underrepresented groups. So again, I think that the metrics, they're troubling, and they should be, and they speak for themselves. I think what was more telling for me, especially, was the qualitative data. And how we got that is we actually sat down and had conversations with individuals across the profession at various levels, some that were still in the profession, some that left, just to figure out why they left. And get some real qualitative data around that. And what we found is there was some real troubling feedback that we got. I mean, we've heard from a variety of demographics, and we heard things such as, an Asian American man in a senior leadership position being told he needed to act more straight. An African American woman that was a senior level presenting before peers, when she entered the room, they asked her, did she bring the coffee? A Latinx woman speaking to one of the janitors in the hallway, and we're speaking Spanish, and a woman actually walked by her and asked her to speak English at work. And it goes beyond that. Even on a gender perspective, we were told by numerous women that had new families that they weren't given visible projects or big projects because they were new mothers. So I say that to say that, when we deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity can be reflected in the quantitative data. But what's more telling, and I would say more important, is to actually sit down and have those conversations, because inclusion and equity, of course, equity can be defined in equitable pay, and that can be a metric. But the qualitative metrics that we find around inclusion and equity are so much more telling than just those numbers individually. And then in the process of gathering this data, I think it's really important to make listeners aware, is that we took a very clinical approach. And I think, as association executives, we use two acronyms, if you will. The first one is SPIE, SPIE. The second one is LERP, LERP. First you scan, then you plan, then you implement that plan, and then you evaluate. I think the most important piece of this process is really scanning, because you have to understand the total landscape. You have to understand what some of the challenges are, and that's gathered through doing that scanning process and gathering that quantitative data as well as that qualitative data. And then, of course, LERP. When we launch these programs and these initiatives, first, is it legal? Is it ethical? Is it responsible? And is it practical? And once we check all those boxes, we can proceed.
LERP, that takes me back to my CAE studies.
Yes, indeed.
Yes,
That's where it comes
I
from.
still remember it. I still remember. Yeah. The stories you just shared, which are unbelievable and shocking, it kind of ties into my next question, because one of the things that shocked me from the findings from the first phase of the research was that as many as 55% of accountants from underrepresented groups leave their employers, and as many as 18% of them leave the accounting profession altogether. And this is a profession that's already losing thousands of CPAs and accountants every single year due to retirements, because we're so baby boomer heavy. So what kind of impact do these underrepresented groups leaving the profession or leaving their employers, what kind of impact does that have on the employer and the profession?
That's a great question, and it has a significant impact. And I'll speak to the short-term impact and then the long-term impact, which I think is really much more significant than the short-term. I think we have to understand first that competition exists when we're speaking about individuals coming in entry-level positions. We understand that entrepreneurialism is really gaining a lot of steam with young people, because they're seeing that they can do the same work, they can do impactful work, and they can do it on their own. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing that we might find as a long-term impact is really the drying of the pipeline. As we lose people through the bottom and we're not filling them through the top for a variety of reasons, the pipeline will dry. And what we've seen through various research and various conversations is one of the main things that happen when that happens is the standards and the requirements start to become lowered, because you have to get those numbers in the pipeline, and that's certainly not what we want, because accountants are held in such high esteem. We certainly don't want to minimize those requirements and those standards. And I think the other thing that we'll find is that there are going to be many more alternative careers that pop up. And because they happen over time, and as individuals, as youth, as underrepresented particularly, find these alternative careers, they will stop pursuing accounting careers. And I think what we found doing a lot of think tanks and just listening to academics and listening to senior level management and recruiters and those that focus on retention is that with regards to talent, it's a tricky thing, because we understand that we have to impact the pipeline at various levels. And we also heard that, trying to attract this talent at the high school level and the college level is already too late. Because a lot of them are defining what they want to do by the people they see, which are their parents, uncles, people in their environment that are accountants or work in accounting. That attracts them right away. But attracting them in math first. And we've looked at partnering with organizations such as Junior Achievement and Inroads to kind of get access to those individuals at an earlier age.
I know our CEO, Ralph Thomas, been very active with DE&I initiatives at the AICPA and other organizations. He's been making the case about the business imperative associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for a lot of years was talking about the business imperative as it related to firms and clients. But I think now what CPAs and accountants are seeing more of, or maybe is resonating more with them, is this idea of, like you were saying, the pipeline, that if we don't broaden the interest in accounting amongst a broader group of people, among these underrepresented groups, that it's going to have a big impact on the pipeline going forward. And that really seems to be hitting a nerve with people.
Yes.
I think the idea of not bringing in a new generation of CPAs that's representative of the larger population is really something that seems to be sinking in. So one thing, there does seem to be, I don't want to, just there's a lot of negative to focus
Mhm.
on, certainly in this area, but there was some observable positive movement in DE&I initiatives in the research, particularly at larger organizations, larger metropolitan centers, and in small organizations who have leaders who are passionate about DE&I progress. But as many in the profession express a desire to close the diversity gap, they also seem to say, well, we don't know what to do, or we don't know how to do it, we don't know where to start. So one of the things that excited me about IMAs, the next phase of your research, was that you were looking to identify actionable steps that accounting and finance leaders could take. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, absolutely. I think one of the most important things that we found is that you really have to be deliberate about developing your DEI strategies and programming. And when I say deliberate, a lot of times what we find ourselves doing with regards to DEI programming is, one, we create a mentorship program, and we think that that's going to solve everything. We create these mentorship programs and thinking that that's the key. The second thing that a lot of organizations do, thinking that it's a quick fix, is they create these employee resource groups, these ERGs, and they put these different underrepresented groups together and think that that solves a problem. But what we find is that those two things, separately, don't really solve the issues. It's almost like giving a person a tissue to wipe their nose, but not identifying the cold itself. So what we want to do is we want to take a look at things, and things we can do um, during the process and after the process. And when I say that, I mean the onboarding process is a real it's a real moment. And what our CEO says is he likes to use the O and O. We have an opportunity and an obligation to utilize these times and these processes to our advantage. So I think asking questions during the onboarding process about your individuals coming on, like what are their expectations? What are they looking to get from this experience? What are some of the negative experiences they had at other places? And then really checking on them, whether during sort of performance appraisal, but periodically, to make sure that these things are in line. I think the second thing is not just having a mentoring program where people can come at their leisure. I think having a real structured mentorship program is really important. And beyond mentorship, I think sponsorship is much more important. And I like to use the analogy that mentorship is, a mentor helps you build your brand, where a sponsor helps you sell your brand. And I think those two things are really important, because it makes no sense for a mentor helping you develop your brand and then you just sit on the shelf in this glorious can that looks beautiful, but no one purchases it. And I think that's what sponsorship does. And we've seen organizations do a wide variety of things with regards to sponsorship. Some tie it to their bonus strategies. Some tie it to their annual performance reviews. So I think those things are great. And I think finally, when I say be deliberate, I think when developing DEI programs and initiatives, if they don't focus on one of four things, I don't think they're hitting the target, and you should re-examine why you're doing it. If it doesn't provide access, exposure, development, or recognition, then you should really examine why you're doing that program. Because what we find is there are a lot of organizations that are doing a lot of things, a lot of stuff, but it's much better to do a few things great than doing a bunch of things bad. And I think a lot of times they try to boil the ocean just to show that they're doing a lot of things, and they're not having the necessary impact.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of things. Again, Ralph Thomas has been a big advocate for a while now, sponsors being one of them. And I think that idea of checking in with somebody on a regular basis, it's amazing. I think we take that type of communication for granted, that we just assume, well, if nobody's saying anything back to us, that they must be okay. But I think those regular check-ins, every time I read any type of research regarding DE&I initiatives, a lot of it comes back to that people feel like that no one above them cared about what was going on because nobody ever checked in with them. So I think that communication is a big deal, and that's where the sponsor comes in.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is who is asking the questions, because people lock up when HR is asking it, when their boss is asking the questions. What we found is that the best conversation comes from those peer evaluations, where you're sitting down with your peer and they're asking you questions, and and they're saying, this is confidential. We just want to ask the questions and see what our workforce looks like and what they're thinking. There's a growing concern about regarding psychological safety and mental health in the workplace. And I think asking those questions and having those conversations can go a long way in identifying those that are in need.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm just going to take a moment to insert a shameless plug into this, but
Sure.
it's about you.
Absolutely.
We are excited to have you present the findings from the second phase of your research at our free Membership Plus webinar on April 25th. So those members who are watching or listening, if you're interested, you can register at njcpa.org/plus. So thank you again for doing that presentation. Looking forward to it.
My pleasure.
I mentioned in my opening that achieving progress in DE&I in the accounting profession has been slow. I think everybody knows that. Everyone can acknowledge that. What can individual accountants, accounting firms, and companies take away from your research that can help enhance the recruitment and advancement of underrepresented groups?
Well, I think to answer that, I think we have to go a little bit back. I think first, in order to kind of truly articulate what they can do, some of the actionable practices and some takeaways from the research, I think we have to go back and look at some of the inhibitors of progress that we identified, some of the things, some of the barriers of progress that we identified. So, one of them, the one that I was surprised at is that some still view diversity as not a true priority. So this is an obvious barrier, because if it's not a priority and individuals don't think it's a problem, then they won't put the appropriate resources behind it. I think the other one is that we notice that implicit bias negatively affects decisions and behavior. So if you don't know what you don't know, then it still affects the decisions that you make and those individuals that are affected by those decisions. So I think that's the other thing. I think, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, we also found that there's a severe lack of role models, mentors, and sponsors for diverse talent. And when I speak to, I have several mentees, and when I speak to them, I tell them I shouldn't be your only mentor. You should have a board of directors, and they shouldn't all look like you. I think that's the other thing is getting them past that barrier that a mentor needs to look like them, so that they can associate or they can relate to their story. I don't need that. As a mentee, you need to gather a variety of perspectives and be inclusive in your mentor selection, so that you can get a bunch of different frames of thought around that. And I think the last one is some believe no DEI action is needed. They believe that we're already as diverse, inclusive, and equitable as we need to be. To those, I try to just state the obvious, but you can't reach everyone. And I think you get to that point. But now getting to what we found are some of the solutions, some of the things that we heard and we drew from the research. I think number one is obviously awareness needs to be raised. I think you have to raise awareness around what the challenges are, what the issues are, and what we have an obligation to address. And I think this second research really identifies that. And not to steal any thunder from it, but I think we came up with a title. It's Diversifying Global Accounting Talent, Actionable Solutions for Progress. And I think we take a look at DEI around the world. And I think that's really important as well, because issues are different regionally. Whereas we have issues with social justice and ethnicity and race, in some regions around the world, the primary issue is still gender. And when you look at India and those regions, they still have some effect around the caste system. So we really wanted to take a look at DEI globally, and then take a look at some of the actionable practices that can be implemented. Our CEO challenged us, Jeff Thompson, challenged us to create this document with the expectation that anyone can pick it up, whether they're a DEI professional or not, and look at some things that they can do rather easily to kind of combat the issues with DEI. So I think raising awareness is definitely one thing. Attracting diverse talent, as easy as it sounds, is one of the other things. And again, we try not to boil the ocean, but how I look at that is having the most impact that we can at various levels of the pipeline, whether that be high schoolers, whether that be middle schoolers, whether that be entry level, whether that be middle management, and providing them with development opportunities to hit that next level, and whether that's senior management to help them understand how they can be mentors and sponsors to those that are coming up. And the last two are really driving career promotion by taking specific steps to ensure that people with diverse backgrounds have equitable access, and then increasing accountability for progress. And I think this is probably the most important, because with any program, you want to develop metrics that can show success or not success. And I think that's really important with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not just relying on those diversity, those quantitative diversity metrics, but also relying on those qualitative inclusion and equity metrics as well.
You mentioned earlier that if the approach is to go after underrepresented groups in college or even high school, sometimes it's too late. So there's a lot of hand-wringing in the profession about the image of the profession and the impact that image has on recruitment. So are there things that the profession can do to dispel the stereotypes, misconceptions about accountants and the business community, and address the social, cultural, and economic challenges associated with attracting underrepresented groups into the accounting profession?
I think there are a few things that we can do, and I think some of them are low-hanging fruit. Some of them are going to require a little bit more work. I think if we focus on, if we think about the profession in realms of change management, where you look at the current state and you look at the future state, I think if we really focus on the future state and what the accounting the profession is moving towards and what the future accountant will look like, I think that'll take us a long way in recruiting that new diverse talent. With the advent of blockchain and robotics and all of that new technology, and helping them understand that the new accountant will not focus on the number. The new accountant will focus on how to strategically use that number. And I think that will take us a long way. I think the other thing, and in our work with the PhD project, we found this as well. Students want to be taught by those that look like them, because then they have a story, they have a connection to that professor. And the PhD project does great work in identifying underrepresented talent and putting them through a PhD program so that they can teach at the college university level in business schools. And I think we really need to focus, we should focus on that as well, focusing on who's teaching our students this profession, because it has to be a tangible connection. There has to be a tangible relationship between those that teach and those that learn, and I think that goes a long way as well. And then finally, I think, and I've had this conversation with several people, we have to remove the stigma of what being an accountant means. And I had this conversation with one of my friends that's a football coach, and he coaches his son, and they make an example of the kid out on the football field that's horrible, that can't catch, can't run, can't walk with can't walk and chew gum at the same time, and they say things like this: "Oh, don't worry about him, he's going to be a great accountant." So what that does is it puts the stigma on what the accounting looks like and what the accounting can be. And we're so much more than that. And at the New York State Society of CPAs, we had a wonderful program where we brought underrepresented kids in high school and showed them what accounting is. We showed them the CFO, the New York Mets, and we showed them, a sports agent that majored in accounting and those things. So I think that's the other thing, is we have to really change their vision of what being an accountant means. And like I said, some are easier than others, but those are some of the things that I think we should really be focusing on really doing as we do our outreach.
And I think those are valid points for bringing anybody into the profession, not just underrepresented groups. So something that I think the profession needs to focus on overall when it looks at the pipeline, not just when it comes to DE&I.
So true, so true, so true.
Well, Darryl, thank you so much for joining us today and for all of your DE&I efforts. We look forward to the upcoming research report and the webinar you'll be presenting for us.
I appreciate it, and I look forward to it as well. Thank you so much, Don, and thank you, New Jersey CPAs.
And thank you all for listening and watching. To access IMA's DEI research, visit imanet.org. And for more DEI content, resources, and events, including our upcoming webinar with Darryl titled Diversifying Accounting Talent, Actionable Solutions for Progress on April 25th or April 28th, visit njcpa.org/diversity.